You look at some of the military decorations down through the years. You had the Sullivan brothers. You had Wild Bill Donovan, who was the commander of the 69th Regiment during World War One. He got a Congressional Medal of Honor subsequently. He was the founder. FDR asked him to found the OSS, which subsequently became the CIA.
That was Hilary Beirne, who's working on the project IrishAmerica250.org. Hello and welcome to episode 128 of the Irish Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Becker. Hilary Beirne will be my guest on the show today to talk about his various efforts to highlight the contributions Irish Americans and Irish immigrants have made to the history of the United States over the course of the country's first 250 years. Of course, this is all leading up to July 4th of next year, when we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The video of this conversation was posted on the Community Network site for members of the Irish American Baseball Society last month. If you are a member of the IABS, make sure you're visiting the Community Network site for great conversations and to stay up to date on what's happening with the organization. If you are not a member of the Irish American Baseball Society, head to irishbaseball.org right now and join. As we enter the 250th anniversary of the United States, I would also like to open things up for your guest suggestions. Does your area of the U.S. have some unique Irish American or Irish history that isn't widely known? Do you know somebody who's done a lot of research on an Irish topic you think we should cover? Go to the Community Network and suggest any potential guests that you would like to hear on the show. Let's get things started with today's conversation. Thanks for joining us, Hilary.
Thank you very much for having me, Rick.
I have been working on, for the past couple of months, lining up guests for the Irish Baseball Podcast for the early part of 2026 to talk about Irish Americans and their contributions to the United States in honor of the 250th anniversary of the United States. And you have been working for much longer on a similar project. So I want to hear just all about what you're doing here.
Well, last April, a group of us got together when we recognized that next year will be the 250th anniversary of the United States. And needless to say, at the start of the Revolution and the Declaration of Independence and so on, down through the last 250, the Irish have been there. They've been at the forefront, leading from the front, fighting in the front lines in the Revolutionary War, and down through the ages, they have contributed tremendously to all walks of life here in the United States. And a classic example is General Stephen Moylan was a friend of George Washington. He was from Cork, and he was the first person to come up with the term United States of America. And on January 14th at Villanova University, because he was one of the founding members of the Friendly Sons and Daughters of St. Patrick in Philadelphia, we're going to be hosting an event where we will recognize his contribution to the history of the United States.
Wow, that is wonderful. I know that one of the interviews that I have already done for this, and it's already aired as a podcast, was about John Fitzgerald, which is funny because the founder of the Irish American Baseball Society is also named John Fitzgerald. But there was a John Fitzgerald in the 1770s who was also a close associate of George Washington. He was at Valley Forge. He was at Princeton, and he also developed the first Catholic Church in the Washington, D.C. area in Arlington, Virginia. So we think of the Irish American contribution, the Irish contribution coming after the famine and after the huge immigration. But that's not true at all. As a matter of fact, I believe that, I don't know the current president, but I know that from like Andrew Jackson until Barack Obama, every president had some Irish lineage in their background. So the Irish have been here the whole time making a difference.
Huge difference. The first few presidents of the United States would have been direct descendants of Northern Ireland Scotch. And a classic example of a well-known individual here in the United States is Henry Knox. His parents were from Northern Ireland, and of course we have today Fort Knox in his memory. Also in the Broadway show Hamilton, another Irishman features there. He was the tailor spy for George Washington in New York during the Revolution, and information that he was able to collect and pass on saved George Washington's life at least twice, if not three times. And that's Hercules Mulligan. And Hercules Mulligan is from Northern Ireland, and he's buried in Trinity Church with Alexander Hamilton. There's, as you quite rightly point out, the Irish were here before the establishment of the United States, and contributed back then, and still, as you note, still contribute tremendously today.
So a lot of the Irish who were a part of the Revolutionary War, you mentioned Mulligan, we talk about Fitzgerald, you can talk about any of these Irish and Irish Americans who fought in the Revolution. Were they fighting more for their new country, for the United States, or was this still some residual anti-English sentiments that they were taking, or was it a combination of both?
Definitely a combination of both. A lot of the Irish that came, I'll put it this way. Post-famine, yes, it would definitely have been both. Pre-famine, it's hard to tell from the point of view that quite a lot of them that would have immigrated to the United States were relatively prosperous individuals. As a result, when they came to the United States, they were able to slot in here with the colonial English, and were able to move and shake, for the want of a better word, politically in the different movements and blend in. So prior to the famine, I would say they were fighting really for their new adopted country, more so than going back at the British.
And we can look at a lot of the revolution, and that's going to be a big topic throughout 2026, is going to be the Revolutionary War. But it's a 250-year history of the United States, and the Irish have been there the entire time. I know, for example, I live in eastern Pennsylvania, about an hour away from Gettysburg, and there were several Irish regiments that fought in the Battle of Gettysburg, fought for the Union, and that was a big source of soldiers for the Union Army. Came from right off the boat Irish immigrants who wanted to fight for their new country.
Like in 1845 to about 1850, you had the Irish famine. You had one of the years, 1847, was known as Black 47 because so many people died that particular year in Ireland. But and the following year, 1848, you had a revolution, a rising in Ireland, the Young Irelanders, and out of that, obviously failed rebellion, came Thomas Francis Moore, who ended up, he was the designer of the modern day Irish flag. He ended up being sent to Van Diemen's Land. He escaped, came to New York. He was a lawyer in Ireland, and he became a well-known auditor, not auditor, orator here in New York. And he, along with Michael Corcoran from Sligo, who was also a member of the failed Young Irelanders Rebellion, established the Irish Brigade, which became subsequently the 69th Regiment here in New York. Both of them fought in Gettysburg and for the Union. And Michael Corcoran became Provost Marshal of Washington for George Washington. And also Thomas Francis Meagher, when he died, he fell off a riverboat in the Mississippi, but he was the acting governor of Montana. So the Irish, as you said, fought in the Civil War. On the Union side, a lot of them did, but some did fight on the Confederate side. We know less about them, but they did actually fight there as well. And since then, when you look at the history of the Irish Brigade in Gettysburg and what they did, and holding, I believe it was Big Round Top, was the site. It's just amazing what they did in Fredericksburg. While the Union lost that battle, the Irish were the brigade that got the closest to breaking the Confederate line. And one of the reasons they know that is the Irish Brigade wanted shamrocks and couldn't get shamrocks, so they put boxwood was the closest thing to shamrock that they could find, so they put it in their uniform. And when the battle was over, the ones that came within a few yards of getting to the Confederate lines were the soldiers with the boxwood in their hats. And today, that is still honored by the 69th Regiment. Every St. Patrick's Day in New York City, the regiment wears boxwood in their uniforms when they march in the New York City St. Patrick's Day parade. But it's amazing. The Irish are the most decorated ethnic group in the armed services of the United States. They're the most celebrated, certainly, in an awful lot of places, especially in New York and Boston. And I have to say that the legacy that the people have left behind is just amazing. Absolutely amazing. It's fascinating to read.
And the memorial to the 69th Regiment in Gettysburg, if you ever have the chance to visit it, it is beautiful. It is a huge Celtic cross. And then at the base, they have an Irish wolfhound sleeping on the base of the monument. It is absolutely gorgeous. And I definitely recommend, if you're listening to this podcast, that is a memorial that you want to see in person. I promise you that.
Gettysburg is absolutely amazing. I would highly recommend it for anybody who's even slightly interested in history to go visit. It's just a fascinating place.
And around that same time, maybe a little bit earlier, we had a guest on the show. He wrote a book, When the Irish Invaded Canada. And I think this is an amazing story about Irish Americans and Irish immigrants in America who came up with maybe not the most detailed plan.
Yes.
But they thought they could invade Canada, take over a portion of Canada, and negotiate with England to give back that piece of Canada in exchange for Irish independence. And they actually did control a very small chunk of Canada for a little bit of time. So why don't you talk about that story?
And it's interesting to bring this up because myself and another gentleman in Ireland are in the process of writing a history book on immigrant input into the establishment of the state of Ireland. And if you reflect on it, because the British had controlled most of the world, most of that contribution would have come from the United States. So we have a chapter dedicated to the Canadian invasion. The Fenian movement post the Civil War split. And the majority of the Fenians thought that invading Canada was a good idea. And the funding, obviously, most of the funding that the Fenians had went towards that project. Needless to say, in hindsight, you shake your head and you go, what were they thinking of? But they, in their infinite wisdom at that time, felt that there was logic in it. So you had the Battle of Niagara. So if you go up to Niagara Falls, make sure you go across the border and go slightly north of the city, and there's like a roadway that goes down, and that's where the Battle of Niagara, where the Fenians, mostly members of the 69th and the Irish Brigade, fought a battle with the British Army and subsequently had to withdraw and back to Buffalo. And part of their reinforcements were prevented from crossing the border into Canada. So it was highly embarrassing for the US government at the time, as well as to the Irish, from the point of view that it was a failed exercise, a waste of manpower, a waste of resources that could have been better used if they had thought it out a little longer and got some of that to Ireland. But at that point in time, Ireland wasn't in a position to launch another rising after the failed Young Irelanders rebellion of 1848. So I still marvel, like, what were those guys thinking? It behooves me as to why they thought it was a good idea, but obviously they did, and there were bright, intelligent people in the movement at that point in time. And when I say bright, intelligent people, I'm talking lawyers, highly educated individuals that would have been part and parcel of that. And of course, one of the things that always happens is infiltration and spies and all of that. And of course, that occurred as well. So that there was the British were fairly well prepared for an invasion in Canada when the time came.
And not only have Irish Americans and Irish immigrants played a part in the United States story and the United States quest for independence, but those Irish Americans stayed in touch with Ireland and stayed interested in the Irish story. So when it did come time for the Irish to try another rising, they actually relied a lot on Irish Americans, and they tried to rally Irish Americans. So in the early parts of the 20th century, around the time of the Easter Rising in Ireland, you had James Connolly over in the United States doing union organizing, and you had Eamon de Valera coming over to the United States with Harry Boland and trying to raise money and raise political clout for the Irish Republic. So even though these Irish Americans, some of whom were in the United States for generations, they still were interested in the Irish question, and they were willing to help in the eventual independence of Ireland.
In the proclamation, the Irish Proclamation, you have a line, Ireland's exiled children in America. And that's very, very significant, because why would the founders and the writers of that proclamation put in that unless there was tremendous, and there was, support from the United States? And I'll give you one such example that's not really known, but Owen MacNeill received 2 checks from New York in 1914 to help establish the Irish Volunteers. Those checks in today's money were the equivalent of about $4 million. And nobody really knows about that. When it came to the establishment of the state and the funding of the Revolutionary War, again, an awful lot of funding came from the United States, particularly the New York area. Boston certainly did help, in Philadelphia, but New York was, in essence, a beehive of activity for Irish causes at that time. There's no doubt about it.
And right now we're talking about some of the big moments. I mean, maybe the Irish invasion of Canada wasn't a huge moment, but the Revolution, the Civil War, and then, of course, the Irish War for Independence. But the Irish have been making an impact all throughout the country. So, what are maybe some of the smaller impacts or some of the stories you wouldn't necessarily hear about in the big moments of the country where there were also Irish Americans making a huge difference?
Before I answer that, I'll just go back to the Canadian invasion. Most people have no idea that that ever happened. It is like one of those lost chapters in US history and in Irish history, which is amazing. But in relation to your question, if you think about it, the Irish, you have a song when New York was Irish. Well, that's a significant thing of how the Irish helped to build not just New York, but the United States. You had a Catholic school system that started because the Irish very quickly realized that they need to be educated in the ways of the country, and that in turn, and how did they do that? They basically, because of the Catholic Church was strong at that point in time, they supported the church. The church supported them through education, and in turn built an entire Catholic school system across the United States, which an awful lot of public schools subsequently adopted some of the principles of the Catholic school to educate the population of the United States. One of the things today, I had a meeting with the Consulate General of Ireland in New York, and one of the things we talked about was the building of the Erie Canal, which opened up the whole north of the United States. And that was, again, driven by the Irish workers that came to New York and Boston and ended up digging the canals and everything up there as well. The railroad system of the United States on the East Coast in particular was the Irish, who basically built the railroad networks towards the West Coast. And on the West Coast, the main workers were the Chinese. And it's just absolutely amazing. You look at some of the military decorations down through the years. You had the Sullivan brothers. You had Wild Bill Donovan, who was the commander of the 69th Regiment during World War I. He got a Congressional Medal of Honor subsequently. He was the founder. FDR asked him to found the OSS, which subsequently became the CIA. And again, like an Irish person finding the CIA, you look at some of the directors of the CIA, there's an awful lot of Irish names in there as well. And it's just amazing, some of the stuff. In recent years, you had Michael Murphy from Long Island, the Navy SEAL, who again got a Congressional Medal of Honor, and the movie Lone Survivor is based on his Navy SEAL team. You have next year, we're hoping here to have in New York the commissioning of the USS Patrick Gallagher. He was from County Mayo. He died in Vietnam, and we're hoping that the commissioning will be in, I forget the day, I want to say it's November 14th of next year. So that the Irish, and it's not just Irish born, they contributed unbelievable, but first, second, third generations as well. It's amazing. Like, you can go into any walk of life, whether it's education, politics, military service, and you'll find people with Irish last names there. And when you ask them, if you ask them, where are your family from? 9 times out of 10, they can tell you. even if it's 5 or 6 generations back. It's amazing.
One of the things that you mentioned were the railroad workers. And once again, sort of in my general vicinity, about an hour the other way towards Philadelphia, there's Duffy's Cut.
Yes.
And this was, they were building a railroad. Duffy said he could do this cheaper than any other contractor could get this stretch of railroad built. And he got a lot of young Irish men right off the boat. Some of them we don't even know their names because literally they came right off the boat. Duffy signed them up and took them to about the Malvern area in Pennsylvania. And a bunch of them got cholera and passed, and they found a mass grave around Malvern. And as they dug through this mass grave, they found some of the skulls had bullet holes, indicating that when some of these railroad workers got cholera, they didn't wait for them to pass. And it is one of those stories you talk about the Irish building the railroads in the East, and we hear about the horrible stories about how the Chinese railroad workers were treated out west. And while many of the Irish workers were maybe treated a little better than the Chinese workers in the West, some of them weren't. It
Yeah.
was a really, really horrible situation in a lot of places, especially because they were taking young men who had no families, maybe left a situation where, you know, they were from a small village in Ireland. They weren't going to be able to communicate with their families back in Ireland. They had no connections here, so nobody really cared about them.
Yep, that is true. You reminded me of a story from the point of view that Irish immigrants in New Orleans were so discriminated against that they were in the swamp, living in the swamp area. A lot of them contracted typhus and yellow fever, and when it came to jobs, they were competing with the former slaves on the docks, and they were fighting each other just to get jobs. It was unbelievable, some of the circumstances that Irish immigrants had to endure. You look at the history of the tenements down on the Lower East Side in Manhattan. A group would get up, go to work, and another group would just go into the same beds and fall asleep, and then get up and go to work. The sanitation was just out the window. There was really little to nothing. And when it came to healthcare, forget about it. It was just next to impossible. And that's one of the reasons why the community leaders back then very quickly realized education was a way out. And the Catholic Church really stepped up to the plate at that time. When you talk about Duffy's Bluff, in Staten Island, they were building a parking lot in the 1970s, and they found a whole pile of skeletons. And back then, you didn't have conservation laws in place and stuff like that, so a whole pile of them got dumped. Subsequently, later on, they wanted to build a building on the parking lot. And when they excavated, they found even more bones. Thank God, conservationist laws had come into play. And as a result, they were able to find and piece together 86 skeletal remains, mostly Irish, and they were reinterred at the same site in 2 coffins, and they were part of the quarantine station that was on Staten Island during right around the time of the famine. And they're quite confident that the majority of those bones would have been Irish. And we are hoping next year to place a set of bronze shoes at that site, and at the Hunger Memorial site in Lower Manhattan. We're also hoping to do 2 in Boston, which would symbolize the poor Irish immigrants that came post-famine and during the famine. It's going to be part of the extension of the global Irish Famine Way. Last year, 7 bronze shoes were installed in Canada, and the first set were installed in Liverpool. And why Liverpool? Because when a lot of poor Irish left Ireland during the famine in particular, their first protocol was from Dublin to Liverpool and then from Liverpool across the world. So that's going to be play out again next year as part of the history of Irish America 250th, and we're hoping to get a lot of local interest in that, because when the bronze shoes get installed, there will be a QR code, and we will want local people to write the history of the Irish in that area, and then it will be hosted on the national website at the National Famine Museum in Strokestown in County Roscommon in Ireland. And when the project, it'll be a multi-year project, but we're hoping to start it as part of Irish American 250th next year. But when completed, it'll be a 25,000-mile heritage trail that'll basically be like a spider's web across the world. That'll basically, the center of it will be County Roscommon, Strokestown House, where the National Famine Museum is located.
And I am never going to miss an opportunity to mention that back in 2022, I walked the National Famine Way from Strokestown.
Oh, you did?
To the Famine Memorial in downtown Dublin. I walked the entire length of it. So you would see every so often, you would see these bronze shoes. They would be on a slab of concrete or on marble or something like that. And every so often you would find them, and there would be a QR code where people could tell the story of, the people in that area as they made their way to Dublin and eventually to Liverpool or Australia or the United States or somewhere like that. You actually mentioned Liverpool, and I think a lot of people think of the Beatles as being a British band, but all 4 of them had Irish roots, which is really cool. We think of bands like Oasis and the Gallagher brothers, very, very proud of their Irish roots. And this is something that, you think of the Irish in the United States and still holding on to their heritage, but they very much do it in other parts of the world as well.
There's a very famous British pop star. Hopefully, it's Dido, Dido, I believe is her name. Anyway, a little unknown fact is when her father was dying, because he grew up in Dublin, she sang him Raglan Road on his deathbed. And it's just amazing how proud even first, second, third generations are of their connections to Ireland. And as I said to you earlier, if you ask an Irish American, well, you've got an Irish last name, what's the connection? 9 times out of 10, they can tell you, which is just amazing. I feel quite confident that a lot of other ethnic groups would not be able to do that to the extent that the Irish do.
I think especially from European ethnic groups, I think that a lot of that ends up just sort of, going in the mixture and coming out as just European. And the Irish definitely do. The Irish and the Italian, I would say, definitely still try to hold on to
Yes.
that connection to their home countries.
Now, myself and Professor Christine Keneally at Quinnipiac University, she's the head of the Irish Studies program. Her and myself are going to be appointed to lead the charge here in the United States for the extension of the Global Famine Way here. And we've had various conversations, and we're starting to get our feet in starting to start that project for next year.
So if people want to track your work with Irish America 250, How do they do it? Is there a website where they can go and they can follow everything you're researching?
Yes, we have, if you Google simply Irish America 250th, it'll take you to our website. And I'm actually going to do that so I can actually give you the URL. um, but we have listed, we have a sequence of event. It's literally Irish America 250.org. And we're populating a list of events as we schedule them across the country. We're hoping to have a night across America in July, in the week before the 4th of July, so there'll be more end of June than July, should I say. Why? Because there'll be so many events that'll cloud out that celebration. But the idea is to promote a night across America where Irish Americans can go out, have a drink, and celebrate being Irish on a national level. The other one is we want the young people to join, and again, we're still teasing out the details of it, but a night of hooligans where again they go out and they celebrate being Irish. As I said, we have the event on January 14th at Villanova University, where we will honor Stephen Moylan, who coined the first person to coin the phrase United States of America. We're going to have the event honoring Henry Knox on January 24th in Springfield, Massachusetts. We're hoping to have a flag raising the first week in January in New York City at Bowling Green. And invite as many ethnic groups as possible, but the flag raising will be the Irish flag and the US flag. And why Bowling Green? Because when the Irish got off the boat from Ellis Island, they would have had to walk through Bowling Green. It's right there where the boat would have come off by Fort Clinton. And in essence, Bowling Green would have been the gateway to America for hundreds of thousands of Irish immigrants coming to New York. We are also working on having events in Washington around President's Day, an event at the Dubliner. We're hoping to honor Hercules Mulligan, who again was the Taylor spy in Manhattan. So there's a whole host of events, and we want Irish groups to reach out to us. Because we can help them promote events around their shared history in that area. And I think it's very, very important. We're working with the Irish Cultural Centre in Boston with the Bronze Shoes, as well as hosting lectures on the history of the Irish in Boston and in New York. Colonel Jim Tierney wrote a book from Dublin to Bull Run to Baghdad, the legacy of the 69th Regiment. So he's willing to go around and speak on the history and the legacy of the fighting 69th. So there's a lot coming down. It's a program that is evolving. And when I say evolving, as people hear about it, they go, oh my goodness, I got to reach out and see, can we get this event put on the schedule? Or I have a great idea for an event and we can help obviously promote it. We're working with the Irish Embassy in Washington. As I said earlier today, I had a meeting with the Irish Consulate here in New York. Morgan Sullivan is in Florida. He had a meeting with the consulate in Miami. We have Jim Gaffey in Atlanta. He's also mobilizing the Scotch Irish down in the South. We have Kevin Sullivan, who is really the brains behind the whole thing. He is in Bethesda and is working in Washington on getting events around St. Patrick's Day up and running. And we're obviously looking for people on the West Coast because, again, the Irish went everywhere. And while we have a lot of contact contacts on the East Coast. We're lacking on the West Coast, and we certainly do want to promote the history of the Irish on the West Coast as well.
That was just amazing. Hilary Beirne, I want to thank you so much for being here. I often say that you can find people from Billy the Kid to Muhammad Ali who had Irish heritage and were proud of it. So as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States, it is important to remember everybody who has that proud heritage, and you are certainly doing the work. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And as I said to you, if anybody has any ideas and want to become part of our organization, just Google Irish America 250 and send us a note and we'll get back to you, because we're anxious to promote as much as possible the rich history that we have here in this country.
That was Hilary Beirne's second time on the podcast, and he's always such an incredible guest. I want to thank him for his dedication to preserving Irish and Irish American history. I'm your host, Rick Becker. This has been episode 128 of the Irish Baseball Podcast.